I'd like to turn now to telescope control, primarily controlling of go-to telescopes like the Celestron 8SE and of push-to telescopes that have some mechanism for reading out the position of the telescope in the sky. Now, those are not go-to telescopes, but telescopes like the Meade LX10 that have encoders attached to the declination and right ascension axis of the telescope so that a computer can read the encoders and translate that into a location in the sky. I'm going to defer actually talking about those particular two telescopes, that is the Celestron 8SE and the Meade LX10, to future videos. But for today, I'd just like to talk about the things that you need in order to be able to control telescopes, and by that, as I've said, that includes go-to telescopes actually going to a spot in the sky, as well as push-to telescopes reading out where in the sky the scope is pointing. In front of you are a couple of cables that you can buy. One is an RS-232 cable for a Celestron, and if you have an older type of Celestron scope, you probably need this kind of cable. What it does is it connects between the, let me take it out of the bag and show you a little better what it's all about. Most telescopes, for some reason, use telephone jacks, RJ11 jacks and plugs. So that's what Celestron uses on a lot of their scopes. And then there is an RS-232 adapter or an RS-232 connection that you can connect. Now, to use this with old computers that had RS-232 or so-called serial ports, you just plug this into the serial port. But for more modern computers that don't have these, you need a USB to serial adapter. And I'm not going to talk about those in these videos. There's a lot of that online. One thing I will point out, though, is try to buy one that's actually backed by a real manufacturer. The cheap stuff that you get from China often are FTDI knockoffs and other things. And while I have nothing wrong with people building equipment like that, what you'll find is that the first time that Windows detects that device, it will try to disable or brick it or otherwise make it not work well, because basically they are ripping off the FTDI intellectual property. So at any rate, you need a cable like this to connect your telescope to a serial port, or in the newer telescopes they have a direct connection to a USB. In the Meade telescopes, you also need an adapter. In this case, this is a Meade 507 adapter, and this happens to be the adapter that works with my LX10. So let's talk about that. As I mentioned, I'm not going to get into the Celestron at this time, but the Meade LX10, as I got it from the manufacturer, did not have any way to connect it to to software. I wound up buying a cable and using it with an early version of some software that I'll mention in just a second. But that actually is not the best way to use an LX10. Eventually, I wound up buying a Magellan 1, which requires you also add encoders to the right ascension and declination axes. I'll defer the Magellan 1 to the LX10 video as well. But be sure if you're interfacing to a Meade telescope that you have the right adapter. In my case, my LX10 uses a 507 adapter, which is an RS-232. It uses a 6-wire RJ11 plug, but only 4 of the wires are used. The same cable that works with my LX10 also works with the LX200 Classic. Now the LX200 changed, I think, when they introduced the GPS model, and some of the more modern LX200s do not interface using the 507. They interface with a different connection. As I mentioned earlier, if you use the RS-232 507 cable, you then need a serial port to USB adapter if you have a modern computer. Now at the time, mine was a Windows 98 computer and that worked fine. And I used the Epoch 2000 software, which would allow me to read out the position of the LX10 in the sky. It was very useful, but I later upgraded to the Magellan 1, which I found much more convenient. Now let me talk about interfacing to the DS2114, which I showed in my earlier video called 4 Telescopes. It uses a 506 adapter. It is not, and I put this in big letters and exclamation points and so on both sides, it is not an RS-232. The 506 adapter uses the 6-wire RJ11, only 4 wires are used, but it is based on an I2C chip. That is a serial protocol that is used by chip manufacturers, and it is not compatible with RS-232. And if you plug it into the wrong kind of RS-232 jack, it can actually mess up your telescope and or your computer. So while it works with the Epoch 2000 software, you do not use just a simple connector. And beware, online you will find what purport to be 506 adapters that look a lot like this thing that you can plug a cable into, but that's not what you're looking for. If you have a DS114 or an ETX type telescope which has the same interface, then what you want is this. Now these are no longer available from Meade. You might be able to find them on eBay. Notice that there is an RS-232 connector on this end, but you do not plug a cable between this and your telescope. You have to have this adapter box in between. One of these goes to the telescope, one of these goes to this. It's a very poor choice, I guess engineering-wise or ergonomically. It's a very poor choice because more than one person has ruined their Meade telescope by just plugging a telephone cable between this type of adapter and their telescope. It won't work, and it can harm the telescope. Okay, well, as I said, I'm going to talk more about the Celestron and the CPWI software when we get to the Celestron 8SE. I'm also going to talk more about the Meade Magellan 1 when we get there. But for now, what I'd like to do is close out this this video on connecting to Meade and Celestron telescopes by pointing out that the only software I was ever able to get to work with the Meade telescopes was the Epoch 2000 Sky software. Unfortunately, it is no longer available, and I have not been able to find my copy for years. So if you can find Epoch 2000 Sky software and you have a 507 cable you can use it with an LX200, as you may notice down here. That's the interface cable. Or you can use it with an LX10 with the Epoch 2000 software. I find the Magellan 1 to be more useful, but we'll talk about that when we get to the LX10 and talking about how I use that telescope. So I hope this has been useful to those of you that might have wondered about what to buy and where to buy it. Just be careful that you're actually getting the right adapter and the right cable. And in the case of the DS14, well, all of the 506 interfaces, the Meade 506 interfaces, just make sure you're actually getting a 506 compatible system. So with that, I'm going to close this out. Wish you a nice day.